Okay, we are in week uh, 11. This is the Georgia School of Preaching course on the book of Genesis. We're in week 11, like I said, and we're only now getting to chapter 9. We've spent a lot of time in the early chapters because this is the foundation of the Bible. We need to set or establish a firm foundation. Very quickly, what we've looked at in the first 8 chapters is number one, in Genesis chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth. He is Elohim. Bereshith bara Elohim is the name of God. Well, that's not his name, that's really more his title. He is alone God. While there is a plurality within the name of Elohim, he is alone God. There is nothing outside of this one that we know of as Elohim. We don't know yet from Genesis chapter 1 who Elohim is, or as far as who are the parts of Elohim. We'll come to not find out that it is God the Spirit, it is God the Word, and the one whom we call God the Father. God the Word became God the Son. Genesis chapter 2 establishes it's Jehovah now, Jehovah Elohim or Elohim Jehovah, or Yahweh. And Yahweh is God's name. And by giving himself a name, giving Adam and Eve names, he establishes a relationship with them. It's no longer some distant deity out there doing these powerful things. It is God creating and having relationships with humanity. He builds for them or creates for them this beautiful home, this garden of Eden, and it is literally a paradise on earth. Genesis chapter 3, man selfishly destroys that relationship. He has, up until this time, we don't know how long that was, he has been walking with God in the cool of the evening. He recognized the voice of God. He recognized the sound of God's footsteps, so to speak. And there was an intimacy there, a relationship where, how does the song say it? Andy walks with me, Andy talks with me, and I know that I know that I am his own, or I belong to him. Uh, they had that relationship. What more could they want? It was a relationship of the spirit, I believe, not to exclude the flesh, but it was a relationship of the spirit. But Satan comes into the picture and he entices the flesh. He has no regard for the spirit. He has no regard for Adam and Eve. He only seeks to do harm to God, and he cannot do harm to God by approaching God himself. So he approaches God through the one that God loves, through Adam and Eve, and he seeks to destroy their spiritual being, but he goes to it through the flesh. And man selfishly destroys that relationship. Satan didn't do it. Man did it. Satan enticed him. Satan didn't make him do it. The devil didn't make him do it. Man made his own choice. He selfishly destroys the relationship with God, focusing on the flesh rather than the spirit. In Genesis chapters 4 through 6, we find an explosion of sin taking place to the degree that every imagination of the thoughts of their hearts were evil continually. While there were some, very few, who walked with God, the masses, the majority, the world at large uh, were described in that scenario, or those verses of Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Then in chapter 7 and 8, Genesis chapter 7 and 8, we briefly covered that. We find God bringing judgment on the world, but we also see God saving by grace. It's by grace that Noah was saved and his family and the animals were saved from the flood. It's because of their sins that the rest of the world was destroyed, because of their impenitence of their sins. Why is all this important? Why is God telling us all of this? It's true But why do we need to know this? Well, remember the initial audience is that of the Jews who had escaped Egyptian bondage and the Jews that would be going into the land of Canaan. The ones who initially escaped, those of the age 18 and above outside of Joshua and Caleb, they all died in the wilderness. They didn't accept Moses' word, I suppose. They condemned themselves to wander in the wilderness, but it's their children, predominantly, I believe, to whom Moses is writing. He's preparing them for entering into the land of Canaan. To get there, he needs to help them overcome where they've been, know where they came from. And so that's why he writes these chapters. In Genesis chapter 1, he's trying to help them understand that this is a real, living, powerful God. This is not some pagan, superstitious deity that you worshipped in Egypt. In Genesis chapter 2, God loves you. The pagans or the idols of Egypt, they had no concern for humanity. They manipulated humanity, at least through their priests, the way their priests conducted things. This God, he loves you. He wants to be in relationship with you. In Genesis chapter 3, Moses helps them understand this is why we are where we are. When we step outside of the relationship with God, when we selfishly follow our own desires rather than following the spirit that God has placed within us, or the spirit that God leads us by, the world becomes like it is, full of chaos, full of destruction, full of slavery. God rescues you from this. He's speaking to those Jews going into the land of Canaan. In Genesis chapter 4 through 8, we find the consequences of sin. We find the grace of God. So what's a summation of where we've been? Let's begin now with chapter 9. It says, so God blessed Abraham. I'm getting ahead. So God blessed Noah and his son and said to them, be fruitful and fill the earth. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Notice the wording here. For years, I always taught that this is one of the first commands of God, to go be fruitful and multiply. But if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 and 28, you'll find the same wording, that God blessed his creation, Adam and Eve, and said this, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. I don't have that scripture on the screen. Let me go back to it here real quick and read it directly. Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 and 28, he says, and God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them, and God blessed them. Well, what is God's blessing? He said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and so forth and so on. This is not so much a command as it is a blessing. I won't say that it's not a command, but the wording is that it is a blessing. So here God again gives this blessing to Noah and his sons. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. We should treasure this blessing that God has given us, the ability to multiply. It is a gift of God, and it should be treasured as such. God wants the earth to be filled with those who are bearers of his image. That's humanity. That's you and I. That's the rest of the world. He wants the world to be extremely populated. God's not going to let the world become so populated that we can't sustain it, we can't survive in it. God's taking care of this. We don't need to try to take that out of God's hands and be concerned too greatly about that. We need to go out there and be fruitful and fill the earth so that there will be more and more opportunity of souls to be with God. That's what God wants. He wants these souls who are being created or who are being born and bearing his image. He wants them to have the eternal home with him in heaven. So he's wanting to populate heaven. To do that, he's using the bodies, if you please, as of the humans as instruments to bring in into existence the humans into which God will place his spirit or his image, and we become the instruments by which God populates heaven if those souls walk faithfully, walk with God. Sometimes for his reasons, sometimes stated, sometimes not, but sometimes for his reason, God withholds this blessing of fertility. We'll see that in the lives of Sarah. She was barren. We'll see that in the lives of Rachel. She was barren for a long time. Samuel's mother, Hannah, was barren. And we'll find a few individuals that are listed or spoken of throughout the text that they were barren for a certain time for God's reasons. I won't say that every person who is barren because God has made them so. Sometimes we're barren simply because genetics have, in our line of kindred, have brought us to the point where we are barren for whatever reason. I'm not going to try to explain that, but in the text, we'll find that there are occasions where God, for his reasons, withholds the blessing of fertility. This withholding of that blessing is not meant to be a curse. It's simply God using this barrenness to accomplish his will. And oftentimes, I suppose you could say all the times, the accomplishment of God's will is for the betterment or for the benefit of man. In our lifetime today, when God withholds the blessing of fertility, I can't say this is why he did it or this is why he did it. But I think I could say in most cases that if a woman or a couple is barren, it may be that it's not a curse to that person, that God has cursed you by not allowing you to be fruitful and multiplying, but he's simply providing you another way to accomplish that. And I don't know what Lawrence, speaking of you particularly, I don't know what your reasonings are for doing what you're doing, but I see this as God working in your life to be fruitful and multiply, not in the ordinary sense, but still yet in a very productive and a very wonderful sense. And you are not only being fruitful and multiplying by doing what you're doing, but you are demonstrating, I believe, in the greatest way possible, the love of God, showing his love to these children that you've taken in the way that you have. That's what God asks us to do. That's I really respect who you are and what you and your wife both are doing there. In back to the text, chapter 9, verse 2, it says, and the fear of you, the dread of you, shall be on every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, and on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. This sounds a whole lot like what God said in Genesis chapter 1 to Adam and Eve, but there's a difference here. In Genesis chapter 1, they were given the green herb for food. Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 30, it says, and to every beast of the earth, let's start back at 29, and God said, behold, speaking to Adam and Eve, I have given you every herb yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. So animals and man alike were vegetarians. From Genesis chapter 1, as far as we can tell, up through Genesis chapter 9, which would be in the area of at least 2,000 years. I'm giving it 4,000 years. Some people go as far as 10,000 years. But whatever span of time there is between Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 through Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, humanity and animals were vegetarians. Somebody says, well, what about the sharp teeth, the canine teeth, or the carnivore teeth that the animals have? Well, I think they had those, or genetically had the ability to grow those, but nevertheless, what we have here in the text is they ate green herbs. They didn't need those scissor teeth or those meat ripping teeth at that time, whether or not they had them. I think they genetically were predisposed to be able to have them. God knew when he created that Genesis chapter 9, verse 2 was coming. It wasn't a surprise to him. Why God only gave them the fruit of the field to eat from Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 9, I can't explain that. I don't have any reasoning for that. What I do know is that here in Genesis chapter 9, they are able to eat the meat even as the green herbs. Verse 4, but you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is its blood. Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. Somebody shed your blood, I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it. From the hand of every man, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man's blood, or by man, his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God, he made man. As for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. The life, verse 4 says, is in the blood. When you spill the blood, you spill the life. That's going to become very, very important as we go throughout the remainder of the Bible. I won't go into it so much here. You'll get it more and more as you get into the sacrificial system. But please understand, when you take the life of a human, I don't care if it's in the womb or 90 years old, when you take the life of a human, or when you spill the blood of a human, you have taken its life. You have taken that which is created in the image of God, and there will be a day of reckoning. For every hand, beast or human, God will require that. In Numbers chapter 35, we find this again stated by Moses in the law, that it's a capital punishment. He says, the avenger of blood, this is the person who, if you kill my brother, I become the avenger of blood. I am the one who is able to take your life because you've killed my brother. That's what it means by the avenger of blood, the one who is assigned the task of killing you for killing this other person. The avenger of blood himself shall put the murderer to death. When he meets him, he shall put him to death. If he pushes him out of hatred, or while lying in wait, hurls something at him so that he dies, or in enmity strikes him with his hand so that he dies, the one who struck him shall surely be put to death. He is a murderer. There's a difference between, apparently, the murderer and the one who puts the murderer to death. God sees a difference in that. God gives the assignment for the murderer to be put to death. That has to be done by somebody, and God will not hold that man accountable if that man is innocent in his doings. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him. Now, there is due process to take place here, like in our country. There's a process to which you go that should be accomplished, and Moses will go and demonstrate a process. We won't go into that in this. It's not, you don't have the liberty to just go, I think you murdered my brother, and cut his throat. It's not like that. Not even animals were exempt, as Moses already stated. He restates it in Exodus chapter 21. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. So unless you, Moses will later further clarify or identify, if you left your ox out there on purpose and you knew it was a wild beast and that it would harm someone, and you did not take care to forbid that or keep that from happening, you will be accountable. But here it says, if a woman is gored to death, or man is gored to death by an animal, and the man who owns the animal had taken ordinary precautions to keep that from happening, the owner will not be guilty, but the ox itself will be put to death, and you can't eat that ox. It's no longer clean or able to be eaten. Murder is a horrible, horrible thing, whether again it's within the womb or of a 95-year-old man. When you take that life, God says that it will be required or reckoned at the hand of every man's brother. I like that way Moses puts that. It connects all of us. We all are somehow every man's brother. We all bear the same divine image. We are every man's brother. We have one father in Adam, and later on, or now I guess, in Noah, and we all bear the image of our Creator God. We are every man's brother. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what language you speak. I don't care what part of the world you come from. I am your brother. You are my brother. Verse 8. Wrong way. Well, where are you? There you are. Then God spoke to Noah, to his sons with him, saying, As for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. Well, that includes you and I. This covenant, whatever he's establishing, is also with you and I. And with every living creature that is with you. That would be all the living creatures, because Noah had them all. The birds, the cattle, every breath, or every beast of the earth with you. Of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Therefore I establish my covenant with you. What is it? Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy, to annihilate, to completely take away life on the earth. That's the covenant that he's making. And this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations, from now till I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud on the earth. There is no Mother Nature here, guys. There's only our Father God. Mother Nature doesn't cause it to rain. Mother Nature doesn't cause the rainbow. Mother Nature doesn't get mad and wreak havoc on the earth from time to time. There's only Father God. Mother Nature is I believe in my mind, the creation of an atheistic mind. Somebody who is trying to deny God. But be that as it may, it shall be when I, Father God, not Mother Nature, bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature, creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between the rainbow shall be in the cloud, verse 16, and I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Why weren't there rainbows before this time? Rainbows are a natural occurrence. Did God forbid the rainbow from occurring until this time? Well, I think it goes back to the idea that we presented, I think it was last week or sometime earlier anyway, that it had not rained upon the earth. There had been no cloud to come across the sky or to cover the earth. The rainbow, yes, it is a natural phenomenon, but God had forbidden that natural phenomenon in the sense that he had not caused it to rain. The dew was what watered the earth at that time. What water was above the heavens that is spoken about in Genesis chapter 1, blocking out ultraviolet rays. It may be that somehow it blocked out or blocked any ability for a rainbow to form in the sky. That's all great things to talk about and speculate about, but it's really not the point of the text. God says, I put a rainbow or a bow in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember. In other words, God is kind of forgetful in his old age, and he isn't able to remember as well as he should way back earlier in eternity when he was a young man. So he makes a bow in the sky so that he will remember. If you believe that, then you don't know the God of which we speak. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Finish the text here. It says, now the sons of Noah went out of the ark, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah. And from these, the whole earth was populated. Why is only Ham noted as having a child? We'll find later on that Noah, all of them have children. But here, in the naming of the sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Ham is said to be the father of Canaan. Why is that important? For you and I, it might not be so much, but when those Israelites heard that, Ham is the father of Canaan, bing, oh, we're going to Canaan. Our forefathers came from Canaan. Abraham was promised the land of Canaan. That's what you told us, Moses. So there's a relationship here between Ham and his son Canaan and these people in the wilderness that Moses, to whom Moses is speaking. We'll see that relationship drawn on a little bit later. Verse 19 says, from these three sons of Noah, the whole earth is populated. You know, there's a theory that says there was more than one Adam and Eve, that Adam and Eve were more symbolic names given to one particular man and woman, but God didn't just create two people and from that the whole earth was populated. Well, this kind of shoots a hole in that theory, because here we have humanity limited not just to two, but to Adam and or Noah, Mrs. Noah, and the three sons, and so it'd be 6, 7, 8 people. All of us are descended from one of these 8 people, and I guess we can limit it to the 6, because I don't know that we have any record that Noah had any other sons and daughters other than Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we are related either to Shem and his wife, Ham and his wife, or Japheth. And if you're really, really smart and can do the math or do the work, do your homework, you can find out actually from which you came most likely, although some 4,000 years later, 4,000 plus years later, our blood is so mixed over those generations, it might be hard to discern, but in general, you can get the idea of where you came from if you wanted to do that work. Or if you don't want to do the work, you just send it to the Mormons and they will do it for you and tell you that you came from a king or whatever. God blessed Noah and his family, commanding, if you please, for them to spread out and repopulate the earth. And he makes this covenant, revealing his previous oath to never destroy the world again with flood, the oath being made back in chapter 8, verse 21. And as a reminder of the covenant, he puts the bow in the sky. But again, I don't want you to understand God or see God in your mind as some forgetful old fellow up there who, oh, I better tie a ring around my finger or a string around my finger here or tie a bow in the sky just to remind me I made this promise. The word remember here is not so much a cognitive act that, oh, I remember, I forgot where I left my keys this morning, but now I remember. It's not so much a cognitive act as it is a act it's to remember, to act differently than you were acting before you remembered. This phrase, God remembered, is used on several times in the Old Testament, and there are other cases where there are similar phrases, but the words God remembered, I think, are I forget how many times it's used. It's not a abundance of them, but God remembers. And it's not as if he forgot, but when he says, I remember, it's because he's about to act in behalf of that person differently than he was acting on behalf of that person before. God is going to be doing something different than he was previously doing. It's accommodative language. God doesn't have wings of an eagle on which he can bear out the children of Israel from the land of bondage. But we were given this accommodative language to help us in our mind picture what God was doing. He was freeing them from Egyptian bondage. Accommodative language is that God came down and did this. God doesn't have to come anywhere. He's there. But in order for you to get as a human limited in your finite mind and what you can comprehend, God puts it in words that, okay, I know you can't comprehend this, so let me put it in plain English, or Hebrew in this case, so that you can get it. So he says, I looked on, or I will look on this bow to remember. It's not that God forgets, but when he sees the bow, he remembers to act on behalf. For example, in the midst of the storm, it says, God remembered, chapter 8, verse 1, Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth. So God was causing the storm to come up and the mountains to break loose and the fountains of the deep to break up and the heavens to do all that was doing, that we saw evidence of what he had done in that film that we saw in the beginning of our lessons. God was doing all of that, and he sort of just forgot about Noah floating out there on the ark, right? And then all of a sudden in chapter 8, verse 1, oh, I forgot my biscuits in the oven. I forgot Noah in the ark. And so he goes, no, that's not the way it was. God had not forgotten Noah, but God, in the midst of the storm that he was causing or using to cleanse the earth of the humanity that was so vile that every imagination and every thought of every heart was evil continually, in the midst of all of that, he remembers he's going to act on Noah's behalf. God, in accommodative language, reminded himself to stop the storm, save the human race. He didn't need reminded, but just so that you and I can get an inkling of a grasp of what's going on here, not so much you and I as well, but the Jews. God remembered Noah. Didn't forget him, but he remembered Noah. He was acting in this way toward all humanity, and now he remembers and he begins acting this way toward Noah. So stop thinking, if you ever did, that God has forgotten something. That's not the point behind the word. The point is, when you remember, you act differently. And I want to pause here and think with you about that very matter, using the word remember. Each first day of the week, Christians from around the world, throughout time, or at least throughout the time of the Christian dispensation, have assembled upon the first day of the week to do what? Well, to remember. And we assemble each first day of the week to remember Jesus and his sacrifice, because in the 6 intervening days, we have somehow forgotten, right? No, you haven't forgotten. You remember taking the Lord's Supper last week. You remember why you took it last week. So what does it mean when he says, I want you to assemble each first day of the week to remember? Does God think we're so inane or inept that we can't remember from one week to the other, that we have remembered the week before and the 52 other weeks before and the 10 years of weeks before? Does he think that we can't remember? No, you don't think that, nor do I. When we come to the table each first day of the week, again, recognizing our need to be cleansed, reminding ourselves that we are to act differently. That's what we're doing. That's what we are remembering. We're remembering the blood of Christ represented in the cup is the agent of, or a cleansing agent. God, through that blood cleanse that was shed upon Calvary's cross, cleanses us of our sins. Blood in the Bible is always used. I won't say always, but predominantly, I think I can say always, is used to represent a cleansing, a spiritual cleansing. When we take the cup, we're recognizing that we need cleansing. We are a vessel, a cup, if you please, a clay jar that Paul calls us in the book of 2 Corinthians. We are a vessel in need of cleansing. That's why we drink the cup. Yes, to remember his death. But what is it about his death? Well, in his death, we can have forgiveness, cleansing from sin. In the blood that he shed, we can have forgiveness of sin. So we drink this cup knowing of its cleansing, remembering its cleansing power. When we come to the table as an unworthy vessel, having sinned, we remember and we leave the table differently than we came, made worthy once again by the blood of Christ that we have, of which we have partaken. If you walk away from that table, having only drunk a cup of grape juice, if you walk away from that table not remembering what's in the cup, what that cup represents and what it's supposed to do for you, what that which is in the cup represents is supposed to do for you, what the blood of Christ is supposed to do to you, and what is your response to it. If you walk away not having remembered, no differently than when you came, you are partaking of the supper, you are partaking of the cup in an unworthy manner. Shall we read the text? Therefore, whoever eats this bread, whoever drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner, he will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man so examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For when he who eats and drinks, how does it mean, so let him eat of the bread, so let him drink of the cup? Drink and eat, recognizing the cleansing power of that blood, that whoever eats this bread and drinks this cup in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. So eat in a worthy manner. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. Folks, gentlemen, don't let it turn into a ritual. Don't let it turn into well, it's 10 o'clock. We got to get the songs out of the way and get the Lord's Supper done so we can get the sermon and go home and eat. This is a sacred assembly. We come here each first day of the week to remember I'm a sinner. He cleanses. I drink of the cup in that manner, discerning the Lord's body, discerning the Lord's blood. Don't let that slip from your memory. God doesn't forget so that he has to remember. You shouldn't forget that you have so that you have to remember. You're reminding yourself that when I come to the table, I am drinking of the soul cleansing blood that Jesus shed upon that cross, and I need to leave the table better than I came. Brother Whitworth in his book observes that the Hebrew word translated rainbow, there in verse 16 and other places, can also refer to, in the Hebrew language, a warrior's weapon. It's not uncommon, as you might, if you just Google Greek gods or ancient gods, it's not uncommon to see those ancient gods depicted as some kind of deity holding a warrior's bow or a lightning bolt and that he shoots or cast out. Even in Hebrew poetry, we see this. Look in Psalm, the 7th Psalm. It says, "My defense is of God who saves the upright in heart. God is a just judge. He is a God who is angry with the wicked every day. If he does not turn back, he will sharpen his sword. That is, if the wicked does not turn back, God will sharpen his sword. God will bend his bow and make it ready. He also prepares for himself instruments of death. He makes arrows into fiery shafts. So the Hebrews picture God as having a bow that he shoots at the wicked who will not turn from his way. In the book of Lamentations, book of tears, he has cut off in his fierce anger every horn of Israel, every leader of Israel. He has drawn back his right hand from before the enemy. He has blazed against Jacob like a flaming fire, devouring all around. Standing like an enemy, he has bent his bow. Can you imagine? This is what Jeremiah is seeing God is doing. He's up on the hillside like the Indians that you see in the Old West with his bow drawn, and he's pointed at Israel. Not the enemies of Israel. He's pointed at Israel. The bow in his hand, the arrow in his hand is actually Babylon in this case, and he's going to use it to come against or shoot against Israel. That's what Lamentations is about. Jeremiah crying for his people who are being destroyed by God because of their being more evil than the nations round about them. Another prophet says in Habakkuk chapter 3, O Lord, were you displeased with the rivers? Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea that you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows. I don't know if you've ever seen it done, but probably only in movies. But a lot of times those who shoot arrows, sometimes even fly airplanes, they will say a prayer over their airplane or over their bombs that they will, or over their arrows, that they will reach their intended target. That's what he's saying here. God's swearing an oath over his arrows that they will hit their intended target. In this case, it was against Babylon, I believe, that God was going to do that Habakkuk was speaking of. Whitworth, in his comments, in his book, The Epic of God, study of Genesis, he imagines God holding a bow and arrow, but his idea is in this context of the rainbow, he's having the arrow pointing at himself. He's stretched his bow and the arrow is pointing at himself. My covenant to you is that I will kill myself if this contract is violated. I'm making a covenant with you, and I'll put my life on the line. Of course, we know God cannot die, and I think that's the point. As surely as God will not or cannot die, I will not allow the waters to take over the earth like I did in this occasion. That's not to say that God will not destroy the earth. It's not to say that God will not allow waters to destroy at least portions of the earth, but it will not happen again like it happened in Genesis chapter 6 or chapter 7 and 8. He cannot break his covenant. Verse 20, Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. This is a long time taking place here. He's planted the vineyard. He's got the grapes. Now he's made wine. So at least a season here is being passed over or gone through. So it's not like he got off the boat and the next thing he's done is he's gotten drunk. This happened over a process of time. He drank of the wine, was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, it's sort of like every time John mentions Judas, he has some derogatory remark to make about Judas. Judas, the one who was a thief, Judas, the one who betrayed Jesus. John always attaches when John mentions him, he always attaches a negative comment to Judas. And it seems like Moses, God through Moses. Every time he brings up Ham, remember who he's speaking to. He's wanting to emphasize something to these people who would initially hear this message. He's trying to emphasize something to the children of Israel there in the wilderness. They need to know something about this. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it both on their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine. He knew what the younger son had done to him, and he said, "Cursed be Ham, a servant of the Lord." Let me see. Back in verse 22, and Ham saw the nakedness of his father. In verse 25, then he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Why is Canaan getting cursed? Ham done it. "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants, he shall be to his brethren." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, that he may dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant." And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. No indication that Noah had more sons and daughters. That's usually the comment that comes in about this time, that he lived 300 and something years, had sons and daughters. To our knowledge, Scripture is silent on it, or it speaks here on it, that there were only Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The name Noah had been given to him as a name that means rest or comfort. Back in chapter 5, it says in verse 29, "He will comfort us in labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." So, whereas God cursed the ground because of Adam, the idea seems to be in Noah that God will bring blessing to the earth, rest to the earth, from, or at least a hope of that anyway, of a rest from the curse of the earth through Noah. That's not what took place, but that was the hope of those who named Noah. He's a man of the soil. He plants a vineyard. He makes wine. He becomes intoxicated. And interestingly enough, he is not censored for this act. It doesn't say, "And Noah began to be a farmer, planted a vineyard, and he drank wine and was drunk, and God cursed him because he became drunk." No mention of that. Does that mean God is not displeased with that? Well, no, it doesn't. It means that this is not the point of the story. That's not why this story is found in. There's another reason that this story is found here, but it's not the censoring of of Noah. Noah is going to receive plenty of punishment here. Just the next few verses indicate that there was sufficient punishment to go around, and warning, I suppose, Noah, don't do that. That's all happening because you put yourself out there to have this done to you. So you shouldn't be in such a position that could take place. There are consequences to what Noah did here, but he's not censored for the getting drunk, and it's not because God doesn't care. It's just not God's point here. God can't cover, or doesn't choose to cover, everything at one time. The focal point was not the drunkenness. Not that it's not important, but that's not the story that Moses wanted to get to them from this scenario. While Noah laid nude in his inebriation, what happened? You can see it. That's the story that Moses wants to present to these people out here in the wilderness. What happened when Noah was laying drunk? We don't know what is meant by Ham saw his father's nakedness. The most we can conclude, and I think it's probably the actual best conclusion, is that Ham dishonored his father, which would be a disloyalty to the family. Whatever it was he did in the looking or seeing the nakedness, the leering at, if you please, of the nakedness of his father, and then going and telling his brothers what he saw, he dishonored his father. He dishonored the family. Now, I want you, while we think about that, I want you to go with me to a passage back in Habakkuk. We've already been there once. I think this is the third or fourth time we've been to Habakkuk in the series of studies. But anyway, go with me to Habakkuk chapter 2, beginning in verse 4. God is speaking of Babylon here, and I want you to try to get the idea of what's going on. Behold the proud, Babylon. His soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. There's a contrast here between the proud man whose soul is not upright and the person, the just person who lives by his faith. Indeed, because he, that is the proud person, transgresses by wine, he is a proud man. He does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell. He doesn't stay at home because he's always out there getting from somebody else. He enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death. He cannot be satisfied. No matter how much you give him, he's not going to be satisfied. The same is true of wine. His drinking of wine, apparently, but whatever it is that he's out there lusting after, whatever he can get, he can't get enough. If it's sex, he can't get enough. If it's alcohol, he can't get enough. If it's money, he can't get enough. If it's power, he can't get enough. If it's death, he can't get enough. He gathers to himself all nations and heaps up to himself all peoples. Will not all these take up a proverb against him? All these things that people that he's gathered up, will they not take up a proverb against him, taunting riddle against him, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his? How long? We won't take time to try to figure out that riddle. To him who loads himself with many pledges. Woe to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up early or suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you, and you will become their booty? Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. You didn't kill them all. Somebody's brother's coming back to get you. Because of men's blood and the violence of the land of the city and all who dwell in it. This is God's curse, if you please, upon Babylon for what they have done. True enough, God used what they did to punish the Israelites, but God did not cause them to do what they did. He used their own lusts, their own pride against them in that sense, and then he punishes them for using their pride, but for them acting in their pride. But God only used what they were bound to do anyway. Verse 9, woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. We're getting to our point. Behold, it is not of the Lord, of Yahweh of hosts, that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain. For the earth will be filled with knowledge, and of the glory of the Lord, or Yahweh, and the waters cover the sea. Verse 15, here's my point. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle. Here, drink, even to make him drunk. What? That you may look on his nakedness. I think that look on his nakedness has something to do with Ham looking upon the nakedness of his father. I'm not accusing Ham of getting Noah drunk. I'm not saying he didn't, but Noah was drunk, and Ham used his drunkenness as an opportunity to look on his nakedness. Um, it wasn't that Cain or Ham was walking by the tent, saw his drunk daddy, and said, "Oh, didn't you see that?" He took this opportunity to, whatever it was he did, look at his father's nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed and as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, the plunder of the beast which make them afraid because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, all of who dwell in it. Wine and drunkenness seem to be at the root of Babylon's prophecy, or the prophecy of Babylon's future. And there is a lesson to be taken from drunkenness. That's not where Moses is headed in Genesis chapter 9, but there is a lesson that can be learned from it. But there's some similarities in the story here that we needed to see. Going back to Ham, the reason this story is recorded in Genesis chapter 9 is not because, well, let's just get a day in the life of Ham and see what happens. Oh, look at there what he did. There's a reason here. God's got this story on the pages for a reason. He's writing to these people in the wilderness. He's trying to help them understand something or to know something. The Hebrew word ra, which means to look at in a searching or leering way. It's not an unconscious or unintentional thing. Whatever Ham did, he stopped and did it. It wasn't he accidentally saw it. He stopped and he did it. He saw the nakedness. He leered at the nakedness of his father. In contrast to how Ham conducted himself in the presence of the nakedness of his father, you find Shem and Japheth taking extra caution or precaution not to do that. They did not want to dishonor their father, so they honored him. Even in his drunken state, they honored him by walking backwards with their eyes closed, so to speak, covering the nakedness of their father. So what was Ham's sin? Is it just peeping Thomas, voyeurism? He was looking to see what he could see. Is that what it was, or is there something more here? Is this a euphemism, you might say, for some more serious offense? There have been a lot of suggestions as to what Ham actually did. Some say he castrated Noah. Some say he sodomized Noah. Some say he committed incest with Noah's wife. We may never know exactly what the act was, the euphemism, if that's what it is, what it implied. I don't know if you know or remember the story, but when Absalom was usurping David's throne, and David was on the run outside of Jerusalem, Absalom came in and took over David's harem, and in front of all the people, up on the rooftop, so to speak, or not so to speak, up on the rooftop, under a tent where everybody can see, he started having sex with David's harem, dishonoring his father's nakedness, dishonoring his father. I don't know what Ham did, but in some way, the point is being made. He dishonored, and the Jews probably knew exactly the kind of thing that took place here, and you and I probably have an idea of what it was. Whatever it was he did, what the sin is, he dishonored his father. He brought not only dishonored to his father, but he dishonored his father. This is a strike against family. While his father was in a drunken condition, it doesn't really matter. That's what happened. But whether he was drunken or stone cold sober, he dishonored his father. The text goes on to show us a father pronouncing blessings and cursings upon his son. That's something that is typical of patriotic times. Isaac and Jacob would go on to bless their sons with different blessings, and Jacob stole the blessing of Isaac by using Isaac's dim-sightedness against him, and Esau receives a lesser blessing. Wasn't a curse actually, but it's a lesser blessing than what Jacob received. I have no doubt that we know Jacob blessed his sons. We'll find that in the end of the book of Genesis, and he'll predict what's going to be happening with his sons in the future years. But he's extending his blessing to them, and to Levi, it wasn't so much Levi and Simeon, I think it was, received not so good a blessing, probably the worst of the lot because of what they did. We'll find out that when we read that story in the book of Genesis, so I won't go there. But at any rate, Isaac blessed his sons, Jacob blessed his sons. There's no record that Abraham in that sense blessed his sons, but there's no doubt that he did either, because it's the nature, it's the custom of the people. But the question that comes here, and it's something I alluded to earlier, verse 22, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness. That's the second time that Ham is identified as the father of Canaan. And then in verse 25, cursed be Canaan. It's Ham who done it, but Canaan is the one who was cursed. Some speculate that Canaan was a part of his father's sin in some way. He was complicit with Ham. There's no indication of that. There's no indication that it wasn't, but the text is clear enough that we can assume that it was Ham who done it. Others say that it's more about a child being raised by a perverse father. Our culture is full of it today, guys. If a man is perverse in his sexual orientation or in his sexual deeds, and he has a child, his child's going to see it. His child's going to be raised by that person. The child is most likely going to be perverse like his father. And the more people come out of the closet, and the more our courts allow gay men and gay women to raise children, the more perverse they are going to become. There's going to be no restraints whatsoever. Up until now, there's been some sort of in the closet restraint. There is no closet anymore. And now that we're living way out front and out of the closet, our children, or the children of those unions, are going to be more and more perverse. Well, you can see it in the generation today. These people who are cutting off their body parts and saying they don't know if they're male or female. It's worse than the generation prior to it. Well, I think that has a lot to do with what's taking place here, that the perverse father is raising a child to be perverse, and therefore he's going to become more perverse than his father. The scriptures are clear that the son does not bear the guilt of his father's sins, but the scriptures are equally clear rule of thumb that the son will likely suffer the consequences of his father's sin. If your father was a thief, you're going to suffer consequences of your father having been a thief. Not eternal consequences, but people are going to look at you as the son of a thief, and they're going to treat you like a thief. That's the idea. Again, just as the children of this generation will suffer for what we've allowed to happen in our culture, I think Canaan is going to suffer for what happened here at in the household of Ham. The same can be true in a positive way. If the child is raised in a God-fearing home, rule of thumb is that child is going to be a God-fearing person. There is rebellion. I mean, Adam and Eve were the first two children of God, and they both rebelled. There is rebellion, and there's must be accounting for that. But in both cases, good or evil, rule of thumb is perverse parents will raise a perverse child. Intentionally or not, that's what's going to happen. Godly parents will, by intent, raise a godly child. Not to say that that child cannot rebel. Noah's prediction here, it seems, looks forward to a day when the Israelites who would descend from Shem and the Philistines who would descend from Japheth would subjugate and enslave the Canaanites. And you can read about that in Joshua and Kings. So I get it that Ham did the act. Canaan is going to be cursed because of it, not because he's receiving the punishment for the father's sin, but just as a natural degeneration, you might say, that Canaan's people who came from Ham would be perverse in their way of thinking, their way of life, because of the kind of influence that Ham would have on them for the next several hundred years of Ham's life. So I get that. But the question that is begged, and it's the one we keep begging as we find these stories, whatever the stories are, in the narrative of Genesis, why is it here? Why are we told this? Why does this matter to the people to whom Moses is writing this book or teaching these lessons? And he will write down the lessons that he teaches. There's something he wants the Israelites to get from this. In the law that God would give to those Israelites, God would condemn the sexual promiscuity of the Egyptians and the people of Canaan, both of whom came from Ham. When you mention Canaan to a Jew, his lights automatically come on. Canaan was not only a person, but Canaan was a place. That doesn't always work out. We'll look in Genesis chapter 11 in a few moments, or maybe not. But anyway, we'll look at Genesis chapter 11 and we'll see the name Haran or Haran, and we'll see the place Haran. The two are not related. In the original language, it's Haran and Karan, but you can't see that in the English. In English, they look the same. So they're not related. But here, Canaan and Canaan the person and Canaan the place are related. Canaan the person and the people of Canaan, of the land of Canaan, would be descendants of Ham. Now, I want you to read with me in Leviticus chapter 18, this verse from the New Living Translation, which I don't recommend, but I think it was clearly put here. He says, do not, speaking to the children of Israel who are going to go into the land of Canaan, do not act like the people in Egypt that you left, where you used to live. Do not act like the people of Canaan, where I am taking you. You must not imitate their way of life. Now, let's read that from your Bibles, New King James. It says, according to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do, and according to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, you shall not do, nor shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am Yahweh, your God. You shall keep, therefore, my statutes. You shall keep my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I will give him life because of that. I am Yahweh. I'm swearing by my name. None of you shall approach, listen to the wording of this. I've got it highlighted there for you. None of you shall approach anyone who is of near kin to him. How close kin were Noah and Ham? Don't do that. It's dishonoring your kin, whoever it may be. None of you shall approach anyone who is near kin to him to uncover his nakedness. Whatever uncover his nakedness means, it's a sexual intent of some sort. I am Yahweh. I'm saying don't do that. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover that. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. It's dishonoring the family. It's disloyalty to the family. Don't do that. The nakedness of your father's wife, if it's not your mother, still yet, you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness. You can go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and see something about that, even 2,000 years later. The nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, the daughter of your mother, or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness, you shall not uncover. It is a dishonor to the family for you to uncover their nakedness, have sex with them, or to have sexual relations of some sort with them. The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not uncover, for theirs is your own nakedness. You're dishonoring yourself, but it's still within the family. The nakedness of your father's wife, begotten by your father, she is your sister. I'm sorry, the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, begotten by the father, your father, she is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Well, where are you? You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. It's repetitive, I know, but there's a point here. God repeated it to them over and over and over again. He wanted to make it clear. She is the near kin of your father. Verse 13, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is the near kin of your mother. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not uncover or approach his wife. She is your aunt. In other words, he's not necessarily talking about don't be a homosexual and uncover your father's brother's nakedness. Your father's brother's nakedness is his wife. Don't uncover it. She's your aunt. Now, homosexual prohibitions would have been there too, but that's not the point of this verse. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are near kin to her. It is wickedness. The point here is not that it's okay to do this to people who are not your near kin. That's not the point. But there is a point here. The point here is in the family, you are dishonoring the family. You are being disloyal to the family, and being disloyal to the family is a big no-no in God's eyes. It is a grievous, it is a wickedness in God's eyes. God's people, the people to whom Moses is speaking that he has delivered out of Egypt and are taken into the land of Canaan, these people would be family. And they need to conduct themselves as family. Do not be disloyal to your family. Whether he's your near kin or distant kin, all these people, all of these Jews were kin. Now, that those who are close kin, they weren't to have these sexual relationships. But whether it's close kin or far kin, you are not to be disloyal to this family of people, to these family. We need to learn this, brothers. And we need to teach this in our church. Don't be disloyal to the family. We are the family of God. Those who divide the family are to be rebuked sharply, quickly, and put out of the family. This is not something God toys with. This is something that is wickedness. When there is divisiveness in the family, you stop it quickly. It's a dishonor to the family. God is making this point early in the history of man. In my opinion, as we've talked about the last couple of weeks, Adam was disloyal to his wife by allowing her to be close to that tree, unguarded, unprotected. Cain was disloyal to his brother, and his brother's blood cried out from the ground for justice. The two greatest commands, again, love God, be faithful to your father, love your fellow man who is your brother, as we've already seen in this text in Genesis. Your fellow man, your brother, be faithful to love him. Do not dishonor him. So in one sense, the family that we are not to dishonor can extend to all humanity. When you open up that Playboy and see that woman or that girl on that picture, that's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's wife. That's somebody's mother. Uncovering that nakedness brings dishonor to that person. And God does not see it or take it lightly. Canaan, the descendant of Ham, descendants, not just the man, but the people, would be a nation of people who were disloyal to family. And God tells these people on that desert floor before you go in, before they went in, he says, before you go in, I want you to understand something. Don't you marry those people. Those people are dishonorable. They dishonor family. They will destroy family. Don't marry them. Look with me in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7. When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. They're all related to the Canaanites, sometimes generally categorized as the Canaanites. And when the Lord your God, or Jehovah your God, Yahweh your God, delivers them over to you, you shall what? Conquer them and utterly destroy them. God doesn't do that very often, but sometimes he does, and there's a reason behind it. These people are disloyal to the human family. They offer their own sons and daughters to pagan gods in the fire. These people are disloyal to the family. You go in there, you conquer them by the power of God, you destroy them with the sword of God. You shall make no covenant with them. You shall make or show them no mercy. It's not because God is unmerciful, but God has given them 400 years to repent. They would not, they did not, they will not. You shall make no covenant with them. You shall show them no mercy, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son. You shall not take their daughter for your son. For they will turn your sons from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. But thus shall you deal with them. You shall destroy their altars. You shall break down their sacred pillars. And if you know what those sacred pillars are, you'll understand why. You'll study about that later. You'll cut down their wooden images and burn their carved images with fire. These are sexual images that they have carved into stone or wood. You can imagine that's exactly what that was. I'm not trying to explain it. There's no point here. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. And the Lord Jehovah your God has chosen you to be a people for himself. You are his family. A special treasure above all peoples on the face of the earth. Yahweh did not set his love on you or choose you because you are more in number than any other people, for you are the least of all peoples. But the Lord, because Yahweh or the Lord loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, the Lord Yahweh has brought you out with a mighty hand from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore know that Yahweh your God, he is God, and faithful, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for a thousand generations, who with those who love him and keep his commandments, and he repays those who hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack with them who hates him. He will repay them to his face. Therefore you shall keep the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments which I have commanded you this day to observe. That's why Moses puts this story here. He wants to give the Israelites a little background as to who these Canaanites are and why God says you are to utterly destroy them. You are not to marry them. You are not to enter into covenant with them, and you are not to act like them. There will be other nations, Moab and Amalek, who are actually kin to Israel, distant relatives, not so distant. And God will later curse them and utterly destroy them through the various means that he will do so. And it's because of the same thing. They were disloyal to the family. The Moabites would not allow Israel to travel through their land in the wilderness. So they were disloyal to family, and God will bring them down. The book of Obadiah is a curse to the Moabites. I think it's Obadiah. And the Amalekites, they were distant relatives to Israel. I think they were the descendants of Lot. In the wilderness, the Amalekites would come up behind the Israelites at the hinder part of the camp and afflict those who were there. Those in the back of the camp were those who were weak, those who were old, those who were young, those who were women. The stronger people were out front, the weaker people out left in the back. And they were coming up and, taking pot shots at them, being disloyal to family, and God brought judgment on them. Well, here God is bringing judgment on the Canaanites because they acted like their forefather, Canaan or Ham. And so Genesis chapter, this part of Genesis chapter 9 is put here to help the Israelites to whom Moses is speaking understand why they're given the instructions that they're given when it comes to the Canaanites being destroyed. All right, it's 8 o'clock. My voice is wearing out a little bit, so I'm going to take a break. And I will come back. I'll put this thing on pause. Okay, we're back. We're going to move into Genesis chapter 10 and 11. We won't stay here long. In these chapters, we have what is called the Table of Nations. Genesis chapter 10 consists of, you count them out, some 70 nations. Whatever can be said about race, ethnicity, language, culture, the fact of the matter is all of us by blood can be traced back to Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, as are found in these chapters. We came from one of these lineages, and all of these lineages, all of these nations, all these 70 nations came from Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. You won't find anything here mentioned about their skin color, their hair color, their accent, or anything like that. We will talk about languages, but that is for a reason. That's in chapter 11. But these things were not important to those people, and it was not important to Moses to bring this out. And there were undoubtedly a variation of colors within these families. The all likelihood is that if we can use the term biracial, the sons of Noah were biracially married to women who weren't of their color. And race, again, is just a term that we have come to use and to misuse. Back then, there was one race. There was the human race, and it's no different now. There's only one race. It is the human race. Now, we can classify it by the black race, the white race, the yellow race, the red race. There's one race. It is the human race. Race divisions as we have them today are human made. They are a human problem. They're human design. God knows no such distinctions. Noah knew no such distinctions. We'll find that, I guess, to my recollection, I may be wrong about this, the first record that we have of any distinction between black and white would be when Joseph married an Joseph. I'll get it right in a minute. Moses married an Ethiopian woman. We assume Noah was Jewish, therefore of some Caucasian color. I don't know what actual color they claim to be of the four that I grew up with, red and yellow, black and white. I guess they would assume, or they would call themselves white. And the Ethiopian would be black. There's nothing wrong with either the white or the black. God uses as an illustration one time, I'm sure you're aware of this, can the leopard change his spots? Can the Ethiopian change his color or change his skin? No, but why would he want to? But the illustration is, the point was, it cannot be changed. Even if he did want to, even if the cat or the leopard did want to change his spots, he could not. The color of a man's skin is of the same consequence as the color of his hair, the color of his eyes. It's the same consequence as the pitch of his voice, the height of his stature, the softness or the coarseness of his or her skin. There's just no difference, and we need to stop. We won't stop. We desire the fight so much for some reason that we won't stop, no matter how painful it is to our society, no matter how painful it is to our culture. We won't stop making those distinctions. No matter how much we preach about it, we're still going to use that as a gouging point for whatever our motivations might be. And it's a shame before God that we do so. And it doesn't matter what color you are, where you come from. If you're the problem, then you are the problem. Don't put it on somebody else that they're causing the race problems when you're the one who's feeding that fire. Have there been issues in the past because of race caused by one race over another? Yes, there has been. And we can stop it. We can put a stop to that. We just choose not to, for whatever our reasons are. But for God, it did not matter. It does not matter. And brothers and sisters in the church, shame on us when we make it matter. Shame on us. It is the same Spirit of God who creates unity, and Christians are given the responsibility of maintaining that unity. Maintaining the unity does not separate congregations strictly based on color. Race relations in our culture, in our country, in our churches are just horrible. And it is the doing of Satan, it is the doing of man, and it will be much to our undoing if we don't get it right. The unity that God establishes in the church applies as much to race relations as it does to sound doctrine. and the personal skirmishes that we might have between brethren, we need to, with all of our being, every fiber of our being, contend for the unity of the Spirit that the Spirit has placed in the church. Now, having been in cultures where I don't speak the same language as the culture in which I live, I can understand why there would be different churches for different languages. I don't understand why there would not be fellowship as much as possible can happen between those churches, but I can understand why, if we are in Spain or if we're in Nicaragua and the only language spoke there is Spanish, and there's 5 different Christians who speak English, the 5 different Christians who speak English don't need to force their language upon the Spaniards or the Hispanics or vice versa. They need to worship by themselves so that they can gain edification and building up in their own language. Not to say that they should not fellowship or could not fellowship with those who speak another different language. It's just difficult. If you speak Spanish and I speak Russian, going to the same church is not going to be easily done. We're not going to be mutually edified and teaching one another. So that needs to be guarded. That's important, that we be mutually edified and encouraged and admonished through psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs and sermons and prayers and so forth. We need to understand. Paul, when he talked about the language differences or the speaking in tongues, he said, when you speak in tongues, you better have an interpreter. If you don't have an interpreter, don't speak in tongues. Communication is the point. Nobody's being edified if you're speaking in tongues and nobody's understanding you. So if you go to a Spanish-speaking church and all they're doing is speaking Spanish because they don't know English, you need to go somewhere else. You can't be edified there. So for those reasons, I understand separation in churches, but because they're black and I'm white, or vice versa, making a division there, I don't get it. Now, I understand there are cultural differences between a person raised in the farms of Tennessee and a person raised in the city of New York. There's cultural differences, and probably strong enough differences that would be difficult for them to worship together, but they need to overcome the differences. Just need to do it. This separation, for whatever reason, needs to be stopped. That's not maintaining the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. If you've been born again in the Word of God, you must obey, or you must lay aside all malice, all evil speaking, earnestly seek to maintain the unity of the Spirit. 1 Peter chapters 1 and 2 and Ephesians chapter 4. Guys, when you go out there to preach, both of you are African descent, at least by your color, I assume as much. You're likely, in most cases, you're not likely to be hired by a predominantly white congregation. That's not right. That's just the way it is. I don't excuse it. It needs to be changed. But I want to encourage you, wherever you preach, to whomever you preach, wherever you are, don't buy into what our culture is selling. Don't listen to culture. Don't listen to social media. Don't listen to the local news stations who are constantly trying to put race as the cause of the problem, when it may be, but it's because they have fed that fire for so long. If your wife pushes for a racial division, don't listen to her. Correct her. On Facebook, some of the most, and I'm not saying anything about your wives, I don't know your wives, but some of the most racially provocative comments I have seen coming from women. I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's a phenomenon or just people in my circle of 500 friends that I have out there, who have friends who post on their walls or whatever. When I see racially charged comments, 9 times out of 10, it's a woman. I don't get that. I really don't get that. And it's of as much one race as it is the other. We are of one blood. I'm hammering on this and talking about this because that's the point of Genesis chapter 10, 11. That's the point of Genesis, at least a point of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Genesis chapter 6. We are of one blood. We are of one God and Father of all, who is through in all and through you all, Ephesians chapter 4. Don't let history, don't let someone else's reaction to history, don't let someone's opinion or prejudice decide how you will relate to your fellow man. When you see me walking down the street, don't say, there goes that white Mike Underwood. There goes my brother, Mike Underwood. Don't look at me as a person of color or of a different color. We are of one blood. In this table of nations, in Genesis chapter 10, Japheth's people are mentioned quickly and then moved on from. There's a reason for that. He'll spend more time talking about Canaan and Seth, or Ham and Seth, very little time on Japheth, because Japheth's people have very little to do with the Bible story. More particularly, the Jewish people to whom this message is being written will have, throughout their history, at least in biblical history, will have very little to do with Japheth's family, because Japheth's family are in the extreme parts of the earth or the world, away from where the Jews are centrally located. It's the Hamites and the Shemites that are going to be involved in the lives of these people who are on the desert floor, to whom Moses is writing. And God outlines here who is who, and those Israelites can know when they get to this location or that location, or when they're dealing with these people or that people, where those people came from. And that's important for God, to God, for them to understand that. And one reason is, when they get into the land of Canaan, they need to know they have the responsibility of killing, of annihilating, of genociding even the Canaanites. And they need to know who these people are, where they came from, why it is that God is having them. These people have been disloyal to family. Don't marry them. Who is it I'm not supposed to marry? The Canaanites. Who are they? Well, they're the ones from Canaan and Ham. And you can discern by whatever means they had of doing so who those people were. They were the ones who were disloyal to family, disloyal to God. Don't marry them. They're to be destroyed. In Genesis chapter 11, we find the 70 nations being scattered across the globe because of the language differences. The one language people were pridefully headed for destruction. So God took away the one thing that was unifying them, and that was their language. They weren't divided in any way. They were all working together. Black man, white man, red man, purple man, green man, whatever colors there were at that time, they were all working together. There was no division racially of their numbers. The first division came when God divided them because of their language, or with the language. A rough division of Noah's children. Japheth's kids became the Greeks and Europeans. And again, this is rough. Ham's kids became the Africans and the Egyptians. Shem's kids are what we would call the Semitic races, located in and around the Mesopotamian valley, or Mesopotamian world. Look with me, something else I want you to see from Genesis 10 and 11. Look at Genesis 10, verse 32. It says, "These were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after." Did I leave something out? And from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Like there's something missing there. These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations and their nations, and of these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. In these nations and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. They were divided. My point that I wanted to get here is, and I'm not reading it right for some reason, but the point I wanted to get here is they were divided unwillingly. They didn't want to be divided. If ever there were a people who wanted to contend for the unity, I don't know if it's of the Spirit, I don't think it was of the Spirit, but they wanted to contend for the unity, it was these people. They didn't want to be divided. They wanted to come together as one. And if you skip down to verse 4 of the next chapter, it says, and they said, come, let us be unified, build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. They didn't want to be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. They wanted to be together. All these different races are wanting to be together. There's something to be said for that in a positive sense, but there was a negative sense here too. The first part of chapter 11 is about God wanting them to spread throughout the world, to repopulate the world, to scatter abroad on the earth, being fruitful and multiply, but they would not. So God took it in hand to do it himself. The sin of the Tower of Babel is not so much the building of a tower per se. The sin of the Tower of Babel, or the people of the Tower of Babel, is they were prideful in their purpose. God said scatter. They said no. They open rebellion against God. No, we want to stay here. We want to be gathered together. It was a prideful purpose, and it was rebellion against God. The purpose of their unification was to fill their prideful desire of being greater than God, being stronger, having a name greater than God. We want to make a name for ourselves. We're not concerned about the name of God. We want to make a name for ourselves. Back in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, God blessed Noah, we read this earlier, and his sons, and said what? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. That's a blessing. God had given them this blessing. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. These people said, no, we will get our blessing by ourselves. We will get our blessing in our way. We're not going to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. We may be fruitful and multiply, but we're going to stay here. We're going to do it our own way. Self-actualization, self-fulfillment. We're going to do it our way. It sounds just like the 21st century. Maybe not the same, trying to accomplish it through the same method, but we're still trying to accomplish that self-actualization. It's us who are important. It's me that's important. It's what I think is important. I'll do it my way. You know what the songwriter said? What was his name? Blue Eyes. I did it my way. Listen to that song sometime. I've heard it sung more than once at a funeral about a man who was self-actualized. He was self-motivated. He did it. He was looking for self-fulfillment in any way that he could, any way that he desired, regardless of what God said. I did it my way. That is exactly the sin of Sodom, not Sodom, but of the Tower of Babel. Unity is a powerful, powerful tool. And it is a wonderful tool that can be used to fill the earth with righteousness. But Babel's desire was to fill the earth with pride. Let us make a name for ourselves. God wants unity. Don't be fooled. But as Jesus prayed, it is a unity based in God. He said in John chapter 17, verse 21, may they also be one in us. As we are one, may they also be one in us. Then look at chapter 11 and verse 6. What do you make of this? And the Lord said, indeed, the people, these one-languaged people who were unified in their efforts. The people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. What do you think that means? Is God afraid that these guys, through their unity, through their one language, are going to become omnipotent like He is, and therefore I got to act, I've got to do something before they become like me, they become more powerful than me? I think the idea here is that no form of rebellion will be out of their reach. You keep them all here together, no form of their rebellion will be out of reach. I can't help but picture in that passage, in that mind, in the thinking of that mind, cities, large metropolitan cities, not only here in America, but in the world. Sin seems to thrive. It's showing up more and more in our politics. That's people are congregated there, and they because they largely congregate there, they have a stronger power of vote there, and the things hold sway. They hold sway over the country because they have a strong. There's the electorate. Where the votes are scattered throughout the country, and it's not just concentrated in the cities. Is I think, a very useful tool. I think it's going to go away eventually because the politicians will have their way on that, but because they want the voice of the city, because the rural people, the people in the outlying places, they have more strong conservative views, and that's not what the politicians want. They want liberal, and more and more, and I don't know why it is, but it is. But the idea here is that the people, when they are congregated together like that, if they're, as God said to Noah after the flood, from their youth, their hearts will be evil continually. If they keep that attitude balled up into a city, there's nothing outside, no form of rebellion outside of the reach, and they will turn right back into what the world was before the flood. So to slow that process down, God confuses the language. How many languages? I don't know. I don't know how many languages there are today, but was it that many, or was it more than that? Was it less than that? I don't know. It's not important. I heard one time when I was in Russia that the Japanese language was one of the oldest languages and can be traced back to this time. I don't know if it can be or can't. I think it would be an interesting study, but it's not our study, and it's not a concern. God is not concerned that they will unite and overcome Him, but He is concerned that they will unite to do evil and will so inundate the race as to make it irretrievable, even by God. In Genesis chapter 3, God's people, humans, rejected the means of God's blessing and ended up at the flood, where God starts over with one family. Here in Genesis chapter 10, we have them again rejecting the means of God's blessing. I blessed you to go and be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. They said, no, we want to stay here all together. So God judges them and divides their tongues and begins again with a new family. In this case, it's Abraham or Abram. In Genesis chapter 11, verses 10 and following, remember to whom Moses is writing, who he's writing this information down for. It's for those Jews out there on the desert floor who had escaped Egypt, who are going to go into Canaan. And so Noah has said all that he's been saying thus far to bring us to this point. It's all building up to this point. Let me tell you about a story about a man named Abram. And that's what we're doing here. He starts out the story, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but it's a story to get us to Abram. Not that all those other people that we've talked about, including God, are unimportant, but it's a story to get us to Abram, their religious and bloodline forefather. And we're going to learn about Abram and his family through the succeeding chapters of the book of Genesis and through the succeeding books of the Old Testament. Abraham's family will be the center of attention. We'll find other people coming and going in the scenario from time to time, but the center of attention is Abram and his family. And these people to whom Moses wrote or spoke in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, who are going to go into the land of Canaan. They were inheriting the land of Canaan because of the promise that God will make to Abraham, the covenant that God will make to Abraham in the next chapter that we're going to talk about. He says, you came from God who created Adam, who saved Noah, and who called this man Abram out of the darkness of paganism. This is the same God who has just called you out of Egypt. He's the one who split the Red Sea, who struck the house of Pharaoh and split the Red Sea and destroyed the army of Egypt at your feet and saved you here in the desert. This is the same God who called Abraham. And as your father Abraham was called to walk with God, just as Noah was walked with God, just as Enoch walked with God, just as Adam walked with God, or at least for a time he was supposed to walk with God. Now you are going to be called to walk with God. So in these verses, in these last verses of chapter 11, we are introduced to Abram, who is of Ur of the Chaldee. Well, what is a Chaldee? Well, I guess the book of Daniel speaks of them more than anybody else. The Chaldeans were those they were the people of Babylon. Maybe the elite of the people of Babylon, I'm not sure, but they were the people of Babylon. They were the Chaldeans. It was the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, that God sent against Israel to take them into captivity because of Israel's failure to do what God told them to do when they went into the land of Canaan. So Ur the Chaldees, for a long time it was not known exactly where Ur was. There are actually two or three places named Ur. This place was probably, I don't have a map, a Bible handy that has a map. Maybe I do. You can Google it just as easy as I can show it to you on a map. Here in my map, you have Egypt over here. This is the Mediterranean Sea, or the Great Sea. This here is the coast of the land of Palestine, or the land of Canaan. This is where we're going with these Israelites that are going to go up here into the land of Canaan. Over here is Babylon, Nineveh, and so forth. Here is the Persian Gulf. I don't know if you can see that. Here is the Persian Gulf, and likely the Persian Gulf in size has grown or gotten smaller, as the case may be. And Ur was probably a coastal city here. Probably it's underwater now, or maybe not anymore, I don't know. But that's the idea of where Ur was, Ur the Chaldean. It was a very metropolitan area. Probably at the time of Abraham, it was on the decline. But nevertheless, it was a very metropolitan area, a large city, probably on the decline because of overpopulation, and people were leaving the city, and God is going to come to Abram of Ur the Chaldean and say, I need you to leave this city. In Acts chapter 7, verse 24, Stephen said that Abram received the call to leave Ur and go to Canaan. In the story that we'll read here in Genesis, due to his father's influence, Abraham stopped at Haran. He didn't go to Canaan. He did answer God's call, but he didn't fully answer God's call. God's call was to leave family and nation and country and go where God would show him. Abraham took his father with him, and they got as far as Haran, and stopped there for some time. And God called Abram to leave his father's home, to leave Haran. And again, at first he was hesitant to do so, but he did. He stayed in Haran with his father until his father died. It's a sad story, oftentimes, that many people have delayed their calling. They hear God's call, but they don't want to offend their parents, don't want to offend their father, don't want to go against their family wishes to answer God's call. And waiting on someone to die, they sometimes wait too late and die in their disobedient state because of their family's influence. Jesus spoke of that on one occasion when he said a person came to him and says, I want to come, but I need to bury my father. And Jesus says, no, let the dead bury the dead. In the New Testament, Luke, who is the only Gentile of the gospel writers, in Luke chapter 10, Jesus commissioned 70 disciples to go and preach the coming of God's kingdom. In my mind, this was a mission that looked forward to the day when the gospel would be taken into the Gentiles. The world he created, he will redeem. The gospel came first to the Jews because they were the most prepared for it, but the gospel was never intended to stay with the Jews. It was always intended first to the Jews, then to the Samaritans, or to Judea, then to the Samaritans, then to othermost parts of the world. The othermost parts of the world were the goal. Never were the Jews primarily to be the goal. They were a goal, but the point is to start where it's most fertile and move on from there. And this process receives significant attention in the Gospel of Luke and in the sequel to that Gospel, the book of Acts. Jesus gave the final commission to the apostles in Acts chapter 1. He says to go into the ends of the earth. And that process began on Pentecost, when the Jewish nation was assembled. It says, were assembled in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews, listen to it, from every nation under heaven. And I wonder, when I think about that, did God intend for us to see at Pentecost a reversal of what happened at Babel? At Babel, they all assembled together in pride, and because of their pride, God scattered them through the various tongues. At Pentecost, those who, in Acts chapter 2, it says that the people responded to Peter's lesson by saying, men and brethren, what shall we do? That speaks of humility. That speaks of their desire to repent. In Babel, the sin was pride. In Jerusalem, at Pentecost, among those 3,000, the striking characteristic is humility. humbled by the message that Peter and the apostles spoke in a way that, a miraculous way that every man could understand in their own language, humility became a characteristic. It seems to me that there's some kind of I don't know if you call it a sign or what you would call that, but a reversal of what the division that God caused at Babel, he now mends with the gospel at Pentecost. Later, Paul would say in Acts chapter 17, verse 26, as he preached on Mars Hill, he said that God made from one man every nation. Well, he's looking back to Genesis chapter 10 that illustrates this. And I think this is, again, a reminder to you and I as Christians, and you and I as preachers of the gospel, brethren, that nationalism, racism, segregation, these things have no place in the kingdom of God. All nations, what is it Paul said in Galatians, that there's neither slave nor free, bond nor slave nor free, male or female, Greek, Scythian, barbarian, none of it is, we're all one in Christ Jesus. It has to be that way. And we need to quit dividing in our churches. And sometimes you try your best to bring two congregations together or two peoples together, and they just fight tooth and nail. And we find it's easier just to stay the way it is. Mike, I know what you're saying. I appreciate what you're saying, but it's just easier to, the black congregation stay a black congregation, the white congregation stay a white congregation, because when you try to mix the two, it's just a fight. Well, the fight is because that we're holding on to pride. The fight is because we're holding on to prejudice. The fight is because we're not being transformed by the will of God. We're as simple as the world if we allow the things of the world to divide us like that. We need to move into the century that we claim to be. Our culture, on one hand, says that they want everybody to be unified. They want everybody to see each other as the same. There is no white, there is no black, there is no male, there is no female. That's what they say. But on the other hand, they make every possible effort to keep the division hot. It makes news, makes money, and we keep it. As Christians, we need to be the first to eagerly anticipate what Isaiah talked about in Isaiah chapter 2 and a couple other places, the time when all nations shall flow into the house of God. That he's speaking of our day. We cannot let national or racial divisions divide us. The Revelation writer says there's going to be a day when from every nation, from all tribes and all peoples and languages, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God and he who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Every nation. There's not going to be segregation at the throne, folks. And if it's not at the throne, it can't be here. That's our chore. Our forefathers have allowed this filth, this division to become a natural thing in our churches, and it's unnatural. I guess I could say it's unspiritual. From a spiritual perspective, it's unnatural. It's not the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes we treat strangers in ways that we would never treat a family or a close friend, because they're different than we are. We feel like we're better than they are. We treat them with rudeness. We treat them with arrogance. We treat them with cruelty. Genesis chapter 10 demonstrates the entire world as one big family. We have one physical father, Noah, one common creator, God. I'm sure you're familiar with Marshall Keeble, a pioneer of preachers who were trying to, in their day, break down the middle wall of partition between the black and the white. He would say concerning the brotherhood, be they white or black or purple or green. I don't guess he said purple or green, but he says, if I miss him in Christ, I'll get him in Adam. In other words, we are of one blood. In Jesus, his golden rule, it becomes of no effect if we allow racial lines to divide us. The golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you is just wasted words. We as Christians need to treat our fellow man in the way that God would. And God does not regard the color. All right. I was going to get into Abram tonight. It's 15 minutes till time that we're done, so I'm just going to call it, and we'll start off with Abraham next week. Hope the class has been beneficial. I know I dwelt upon the racism thing a lot tonight. Genesis chapter 10 and 11 is where you deal with that. I make no apologies for that. I feel strongly about it. Our past is not an excuse for us to how we conduct ourselves today. The fact that we have had black churches and white churches here in our country in the past, and it has worked well. Everybody's gotten along peacefully. They go their way, we go our way. That is no justification. No justification. The fact that there are worship styles that are different, there's no justification. If it's by coincidence that the people you hang around with are black, that's no big deal. No, it's just not. But if we make it our choice that I'll only hang out with white people, or I'll only hang out with white people or black people, that's a sin. If we're discriminating like that, that's a sin. Need to work on it. Thank you, brethren. God bless. Preach the word. Be instant, in season, out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. Don't forget the long suffering. I know this is not what that's not what this class is about, but don't forget the long suffering. I know I need patience extended to me from other people. I especially need it from God. Be long suffering. When you find somebody in spiritual trouble, even in doctrinal trouble, be long suffering. Give them time to grow. Don't force it down their throat. Don't try to drag people into the church or tie people down and make them stay in the church. Be long suffering. You can't be tolerant of sin, but we can be long suffering. Thank you, brethren. Have a good night. See you next week.